Time for some rock and stone, with a review of the new Leagues of Votann Codex for 40k's new race of augmented space-dwarves. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're taking an in-depth look at the new Leagues of Votann Codex, the exciting new faction of augmented space-dwarves from Games Workshop, now with all the rules seemingly revealed in full. It's really cool to see how the army is actually going to be coming together and playing on the field. Overall, the book initially does seem pretty scary. Big powerful shooting and damage combos with their Judgement Tokens, some powerful characters and some very hardy units. It does look like they're going to be one of the stronger factions in 40k at launch, though how strong is perhaps yet to be determined until they've been truly tested against the strongest stuff in tournaments. In this review, we'll be going through each rule of the book, trying to suss out a few of the strongest units, rules and combos, and perhaps get a feeling for how these leagues are going to be playing in 40k in general. In terms of contents, of course the Codex will have lore sections, crusade rules and miniature galleries, I think all of which will be even more interesting than normal, given that they're a brand new faction of the game, and we don't really know fully how they fit in with the lore yet. As always with my Codex reviews though, we'll be going over the core army rules today, and there's plenty of those to be getting on with so many new units and abilities. For the core rules of the Codex, we've got some basic rules that are applied to quite a lot of datasheets, things for OBSEC, Void Armor and Steady Advance, plus a few unique weapon types, the standard 4-page spread of stratagems, Judgment of the Ancestors, the powerful auto wounds mechanic that we'll go over, 4 secondary objectives, and 5 main leagues and some custom ones, all of which offer kind of similar chapter tactics, Warlord Traits, Relics, and Stratagems. Then to upgrade characters, there's Relics and Warlord Traits, 6 Warlord Traits and rather a lot of Relics, perhaps kind of understandable for a faction of space dwarfs. There's 6 psychic powers from the Skein-wrought discipline, and a points cost upgrade section for the Votannic Council, perhaps a little bit limited in scope, basically direct upgrades to some of the generic character datasheets, each of which give you some powerful abilities and unlock an extra Warlord trait. Finally, and perhaps most excitingly, are the datasheets of the Codex. In Codex Leaguers of Votann there's 5 HQ sections, just the 1 troops, the Hearthkyn Warriors, 2 units of elites, 2 fast attack choices, and 2 heavy support, 14 datasheets in the Codex at launch, so 13 kits total for the Leaguers of Votann, as one of the characters is a multi-build option. I think that's a fairly reasonable offering for a faction at first launch. I think it's a little bit better than the Abmech and the Genestealer cult had, so at least there's a fair bit of choice for most of the armies of the game, even if they don't have any really massive Lords of War yet, or more exotic things like flyers. They don't have any dedicated transport vehicles, but they don't really need them. The vehicles that they do have both act as transports already. For this review, I thought we'd start with the core rules, then go over the datasheets, seeing as without knowing them, it's going to be a bit meaningless for the rest of the rules, and then go through all the other upgrades, things like stratagems, character upgrades, secondaries, and leagues. First up, let's start with the core rules of the army then, and there's some pretty strong and interesting stuff here. First up, there's detachment rules. You can only have 1 Kahl per detachment, basically the equivalent of say a Space Marine captain, so a similar rule there, though you can get around it by upgrading one of them to a high Kahl, which does skip that requirement. Interestingly, it's not just the Hearthkyn Warriors that get OBSEC, those Hernkyn Pioneer bikes also get it, really quite powerful on a very fast moving unit, particularly as with their accelerated thing they can boost out to a crazy 24-inch move, even if arguably they're not all that tough for the cost. In terms of leagues, that's basically your chapter tactics. Being part of one gives you a league custom, quite a powerful one as we'll see later, as it's basically 2 parts plus some kind of buff to Judgement Tokens, so a lot of extra damage there. Some of the abilities are rather nasty. Next up, there's a couple of rules that seem to be absolutely army-wide. Steady Advance, Void Armor, and Eye of the Ancestors. The latter 2 seem to be particularly strong. Steady Advance basically represents them moving forward slowly and purposefully but not being slowed. It means that they ignore all modifiers to their movement, advances and charges, which is pretty handy for slogging through things like difficult terrain. But as a bit of a flip side, they only automatically advance 3 inches, or a flat 6 inches if you have the accelerated keyword. Flat 3-inch advance I think isn't terrible. It does mean you're at least guaranteed the extra movement, and they're going to be quite reliable. But it does mean if you desperately need to stretch 5 inches extra to get to an objective, for example, then you're not going to be able to do that. You don't have the option of throwing an advance and a reroll at it. I think between this and the hunter weapons that we'll get onto, it basically makes the Leaguers of Votann an army that can keep on moving while still fighting to full effect, but they're generally not going to be moving particularly fast unless they sacrifice all damage output. Void Armor's next, and that really does look quite stellar. It's basically Armor of Contempt but better, worsening any AP by -1 to a minimum of 0, and that does apply to the entire army, whether it's 2+ save exo armor, 6+ save Cthonian Beserks, and it does work on the vehicles. It means that AP-1 weapons aren't going to be particularly great against them, but I would say that compared with things like Space Marines, quite a lot of their armour does have a 4+ save, so AP0 weapons aren't actually going to be too bad against them. It's pretty meaningful on the big 2+ save things though, like the Exo Armour and the Land Fortress. On top of that though, you can also not reroll wound rolls or damage rolls against them. Pretty meaningful, and that one will come up fairly often. It'll basically just turn off things like Primaris Lieutenant Command buffs. Certain weapons like Lightning Claws won't have their special effect, and you won't be able to command reroll a damage result, which might allow you to blow up a big vehicle or something. That also is pretty handy to have. Those two rules combined do mean that Votann units might be deceptively tough. The other big army-wide rule is Eye of the Ancestors. This is Judgement Tokens, and we'll do this in an entire section as it's pretty big. It's basically a faction-wide auto-wound mechanic though that applies to infantry and vehicles, range and melee. Enemy units that anger the Votann are going to get easy to kill quite quickly. Otherwise, there's a few datasheet things, 3 unique classes of weapon that come up a few times in the Codex. Hunter weapons appear on the vast majority of datasheets with shooting. They get a flat number of shots and they're not assault weapons. I guess you could either see them as assault weapons that you can't advance and shoot, or heavy weapons that you can shoot after moving for no penalty. Weirdly, it's a special rule that basically gives the absence of special rules. Again, with that steady advance, it sort of means you're going to be able to move around pretty freely, but not going to be able to advance for extra speed while shooting. Magna Rail weapons are a small class within the Codex. There's only 2 options, one on the Hearthkyn Warriors and one on the Land Fortress. These get the dreaded Ignore Invuls ability, and on a wound roll of a 6, excess damage isn't lost, and the excess damage will spill over to other models in the target unit. Both of those are pretty scary abilities, particularly with the second bit being sort of easy to trigger as well. With the Judgement Tokens, any auto wounds counters on modified 6s, so that means if you do get a Judgment thing, then it's going to do splash damage to a squad. You can't really spam them, and you do want the Judgement Tokens to actually make them efficient, but it does mean that a big one on top of a Land Fortress is very intimidating indeed. Finally, we've got beam weapons, another fairly common profile in the Codex. These are one of Games Workshop's favourite draw a line type weapons. You draw a line to the target unit, and for each shot you also hit each target that it crosses as well, potentially allowing you to skewer multiple units if you can line them up. I'd say these weapons are actually strong enough to be interesting. It looks like in general they're not going to be too efficient if you can't skewer multiple units, but they are going to be fairly decent damage if you can. It'll be interesting to see just how much they're played with. Finally, and for the thing that doesn't appear to be here, is it doesn't look like there's any way of the Leagues of Votann to currently ally with other 40k races. People were wondering whether they might be able to be taken alongside either Imperium or maybe Tau. At least in this book it doesn't seem to be the case. If there is any option that I've missed, I'll mention it down in a pinned comment correction down below. Looks like the Votann are going to be effectively functioning as an independent Xenos-style army, even if they're really abhumans. Though I might not be terribly surprised if some sort of future update does allow, say, Tau to take a small contingent of them, maybe to represent Demiurge perhaps. So solid core rules aside, let's take a look at Eye of the Ancestors, the Judgement Tokens mechanic for the Leagues of Votann. I think this seems to be just about the strongest rule in the Codex. It means that damage output is going to be pretty intense, and it bypasses quite a lot of helpful durability things, meaning that they won't often care about toughness, or rules like transhuman physiology for Space Marines. To unlock the ability, every unit must be from the same league, normally going to be happening anyway in match play 40k these days, so not exactly the biggest commitment there. And then it works as a mechanic where every enemy unit can get up to 3 Judgement Tokens. Once acquired, they basically stay for the entire game, and they basically mean that that unit has annoyed your Votann models, they've written them down in the Book of Grudges, and are now easier to kill. Even embarking in transports or going back into strategic reserve don't mean that the tokens are lost, they'll still be present when the unit comes back. What perhaps surprised me is just how easy it is to hand out the Judgement Tokens. Enemy units will get one for killing any Votann unit, they get one for doing an action or a psychic action, often going to be necessary to win games. At the end of your opponent's turn, you can give one out to a unit that controls an objective marker, so another free one happening there. I feel like a lot of armies are going to take a Kahl along, which can hand one out in the command phase, and there's various other ways that you can get more of them or redistribute them, things like stratagems or warlord traits, or certain character datasheets. For the amount of utility they give you, they really don't seem too hard to dish out. The way they work is auto wounds. If you have 1, then it's 6s to hit auto wound, range and melee. If you have 2, then it's 5s, and if you have 3, then it's 4s. The attack does have to have hit normally, so if you were hitting on 5s anyway for whatever reason, that wouldn't let you do an auto wound, but still that's not going to be relevant most of the time. The vast majority of Votann units will be hitting on 3s. It means that any low strength weapons will be able to threaten even the very toughest things around. Anything that's, say, mid strength and like damage 2 or something will become a fantastically threatening thing to any of these. And the mechanic just seems particularly brutal against anything with a small number of high value units. Perhaps things like Imperial or Chaos Knights, or maybe Deathwing Terminators. I feel like towards the end of the game it's quite likely the opponent's targets are going to have a decent amount of Judgement Tokens all over them, so the last few Votann on the field should fight extra hard. Finally, what's more, any of these auto wounds also count as a 6 to wound as well, and that is relevant for a few datasheet points. The Brokhyr Iron Master's upgraded version can do some mortal wounds that way, and as mentioned, the Magna Rail weapons really love that, being able to spill damage over and delete whole squads. It's pretty terrifying stuff, to be honest. It's a crazy powerful army-wide damage rule, and perhaps is something that people are thinking might be concerningly strong in the new Codex, to the extent where it might get toned down in later updates. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that front though, to see how much it really plays out that way in reality. Next up, I thought we'd take a look through the datasheets of the Codex. Seeing as it's a completely new faction, I feel like it makes more sense to start here, as it's not really as worth knowing about all the special rules and things until we know at least roughly what they're going to be applied to. First up, for the troops we have the Hearthkyn Warriors, 11 points per model, 10 to 20 models in the squad. The standard space dwarf profile, it seems, is moving 5 inches, hitting on 3s, strength and toughness 4, 1 wound, 2 attacks, leadership 7 and a 4+ save with void armor. The Thane unit leader seems kind of equivalent to an Eldar Exarch. They get 2 wounds base, as well as leadership 8, 3 attacks and a 4+ invul. For their base weapons, it seems that there's either the option of the Autok Pattern Bolter, a 2-shot hunter weapon at 24-inch range, strength 4 AP-1, damage 1, or the option to trade that out for an Ion Blaster. That one does cost 1 extra point, so 12 points per model. A single hunter shot weapon at 18 inches, strength 5, AP-2 and damage 2. For me, I do feel like those two are probably actually quite well balanced. Obviously the Ion Shot is vastly more scary, but you only get one of them, and the range is a big deal, seeing as they aren't going to be moving across the board fast. Otherwise, each kinsman gets a single shot bolt pistol, the same profile as the hunter one, but just one shot that you can fire in melee. And they all get Graviton concussive grenades as well, a d6 shot grenade at strength 5, AP-1, damage 1 and blast. It also gives them the concussive keyword for one of the stratagems. Otherwise, wargear wise, we'll go through the profiles in a second, but they can take 2 different options per 10 out of the heavy style weapons, either a high las auto rifle, L7 missiles, Hekaton plasma beamer, or a Magna Rail rifle. There's 3 sort of kill team style upgrades, a Medipack comms array or panspectral scanner, all of which do seem pretty cool, and the Thane has his own options, can take an ion or plasma pistol, a concussion gauntlet, or a plasma axe or sword. So what does all that funky kit do then? The high las auto rifle costs just 5 points extra, 24-inch range and strength 6 AP-2 damage 1. Seems like a solid upgrade on either weapon for 5 points extra in my opinion. Might be a good one to take if you just want the squad to be a little bit more efficient and not much more investment. The L7 missile launcher is 10 points more. That one's a 30-inch hunter weapon, and it basically seems like a frag or crack missile. The crack version's strength 9, and the frag version is strength 5 AP-1. Again, seems like a very nice little generalist upgrade, something that's not going to be useless against any targets. The Magna Rail rifle is perhaps the scary one, 20 extra points and 24 inches. Hunter 1, strength 9, AP-4, damage D3+3. It's got the ignores invuls rule and also the Magna Rail thing, which means that if you get the 6 to wound, it does splash damage. Big points investment, but very scary reliability there. I think that if you want the Hearthkyn Warriors to be truly threatening, one of those buried in the squad seems like it's a good shout. Sorry I wasn't very clear previously, but they do have to be 2 different versions of these within the same squad. You can't double up on one. Finally, there's the Hekaton Plasma Beamer, 10 points extra for an 18-inch Hunter 1 weapon, strength 8, AP3 and damage 2 with beam. I'm not sure I'm super convinced at that one for the 10 points to be honest. I'll probably have one of the others. Otherwise, for Thane gear, we've got a concussion gauntlet for 10 points, strength +3, so strength 7, AP-2 and damage 2. Quite a good generalist combat weapon there. The plasma sword is +5 for strength user AP3, damage 1 and +1 attack, and the plasma axe is strength +1, AP-3 and just damage 1. Fun upgrades, but I'm not sure how much you're necessarily going to want them on mostly a shooting unit. I guess with a bunch of strength 4 attacks they could at least bully light infantry. Otherwise there's an ion pistol for a single shot at strength 5, AP-2 and damage 2, or an Hekaton plasma pistol for a single shot at strength 8, AP3 and damage 2 with only 6-inch range. Votann plasma weapons don't seem to overheat either, It seems that they've mastered the art of not blowing themselves up. I guess the pistols at least could be a small increase in firepower at close range. Finally, and perhaps some of the best value of the lot, there's some squad gear options. They can be given to things that have the standard gun. A meta pack for 5 points, which allows you to ignore the first failed save, and allows a stratagem to resurrect D3 models. That seems like pure value to me. Even just the ignore failed save seems great, never mind the stratagem. There's a comms array for 5 points, which allows Kahl rerolls to go out to 24 inches, that'll be reroll ones to hit, and again also allows an interesting stratagem to turn off some auras, which could be opportunistically good. Seems good enough if you've got a Kahl and you don't want to keep him within close range. Finally, there's a panspectral scanner for 5 points, ignores light cover and gains an Auspex scan type stratagem. Again, if you look like you're building towards a big shooting damage dealing unit, that one seems great. Overall, it'll be interesting to see whether people do decide to build around these as damage dealers, or just keep them cheap to fill detachment slots and take objectives. With the amount of buffs and options available though, on paper it looks like they've got enough to be pretty intimidating. Maybe you could just run some fairly cheap squads but throw in one of those Magna Rail rifles. That means it's never going to be a unit your opponent can just ignore. Moving on to elites, and first up we have the Einhyr Hearthguard. They're 35 points per model, and are kind of the Votann Terminators, taking in squad sizes of 5 to 10, another core infantry unit. Stat line wise, they move 5 inches, hit on 3s, they're strength 5 and toughness 5 with that exo armor, have 2 wounds but a -1 damage baked in, just the 2 attacks, leadership 8 or 9 on the Hesyr, and a 2+ save with the void armor special rule, so quite hard to punch through. At base, the Hesyr has 2 wounds, but you can take a Weaverfield Crest for +1 wound and a 4+ invul if you don't take the option to teleport. Overall, a big chunky and fighty core unit, perhaps feeling like Terminators but with a bit more weight to shooting than combat. For melee weapons, you get the choice of either a Concussion Gauntlet or a Plasma Blade Gauntlet. The Concussion will be Strength 8, AP -2 and Damage 2. Nice generalist profile there, but only 2 attacks. The Plasma Blade Gauntlet is Strength 6, AP -3 and Damage 1, but it gets you +1 attack to go up to 3 each. Not terrible melee, but with that kind of profile I just don't think it's very standout at all at 35 points. Their ranged weapons I think really aren't too bad though. They all get an exo armor grenade launcher, an 18-inch hunter weapon with D6 shots, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1. Pretty good for clearing out entire squads of light infantry that. And then in their hand they either have an Hekaton plasma gun or Vulcanite disintegrator. The Hekaton plasma gun's a one-shot strength 8, AP4 damage 2 gun, going to be a credible threat to damaging some elite infantry or light vehicles, and the Vulcanite disintegrator's got an interesting profile. 3 shots at 18 inches, strength 5, AP 0, damage 1, but also 6s to hit weirdly, cause 1 mortal wound and the attack sequence to end. In theory you could go pretty mad with these, get 30 shots out of the unit, give them high Kahl rerolls that give you 4 rerolls to hit, fish for those 6s, and in theory could be pumping out 10 mortal wounds at close range. I guess just getting in range of something meaningful might be the tricky bit though. Finally for the Hesyr, as mentioned, he can either take the Weaverfield Crest for extra defense or the Teleport Crest to teleport the unit into battle. That also gives you a keyword to teleport them across the board later should you wish, and he has got the option of taking a Concussion Hammer as well. Strength ×2, AP -2 and damage 3 with a -1 to hit. That one costs 10 points for a fairly scary melee boost. Overall, an interesting unit, still going to be pretty tough with void armor and -1 damage, even with 2 wounds, and kind of interesting to see Terminators with a bit more emphasis on close range shooting, as opposed to just combat. Talking of just combat though, next up we have the Cthonian Beserks, what appears to be a lightly armoured shock melee unit. They're an elite choice for 22 points per model, again 5 to 10 models in the unit with the core keyword, and they actually have a relatively similar profile to the Einhyr Hearthguard, but trading the 2+ save for a 6+1. They move 5, hit on 3s, strength and toughness 5, 2 wounds, 3 attacks, a 6+ save, and they trade the -1 damage from the exo armor for a 5+ feel no pain, which goes up to a 4+ feel no pain versus damage 1 weapons. I guess they've just got such a boosted profile because they're covered in augmentations and things. To be honest, I'm kind of surprised that they're quite so big and mighty compared with standard Votann Warriors. Weapons wise, these Berserkers have the base choice of either a heavy plasma axe or a concussion maul. The plasma axe gives you strength +1, AP -3, damage 2. A pretty solid generalist damage output there, and will be far scarier in Cronus Hegemony. And what's more, it even has a brutal sweep profile as well. Strength user, so strength 5, AP -3, damage 1, but a massive 6 attacks per guy. If you manage to get a judgment token or 2 on the enemy, then they're going to be able to punch up against really tough things as well. It does look like these guys will be clearing out enemy units pretty efficiently. Their other option for the same cost is the Concussion Maul, strength times 2, so strength 10, AP minus 3, and damage 3 with a minus 1 to hit. That one also looks really quite super brutal as well. Basically a Votann super thunder hammer, and they have an easy 1 command point stratagem to reroll hit rolls as well, so that should help out with the bad accuracy. I'd guess that out of the two profiles, probably the Concussion Maul is the one to go for. It seems that you're not able to mix and match between the two though, that would actually be quite nice I think. Otherwise, for upgrades, one model per 5 can take a set of twin concussion gauntlets. That's an extra 5 points over the base for a strength 8, AP minus 2, damage 2 attacks with plus 1 to their attacks characteristic. Very nice and generalist and going to be useful against most things. And then 1 per 5 can take the Mole Grenade Launcher on the great big base with the Einhyr Assistant. That one costs an extra 10 points, gives you 1 wound and 1 attack extra, so they're actually better in melee as well. And the shooting attack is a hunter weapon with d6 shots, strength 5, AP minus 2, damage 1, ignores line of sight, and has an interesting stratagem that we'll get onto. I guess it's not dreadful, and it adds extra wounds and attacks as well, never mind having the shooting attack, but I feel like it might give the unit some mixed priorities. You probably don't want to be shooting, and you want to be advancing into cover or towards the enemy if you aren't actually making a charge. Finally, their cyber stims give you a couple of extra rules. You get to reroll charges for them for a bit more reliability, and it's going to be dangerous to kill them in melee, as they get to fight in death if they've not already fought. Against armies that basically have to kill them in melee without that much shooting, that's going to be really horrible. You might be able to drag down some serious foes with them with their crazy melee damage. Overall, I'd say their combat damage definitely gets there, particularly with Judgement Tokens or in Kronos Hegemony. Perhaps the biggest question is how is best to actually get them into combat, as they can't advance and charge or anything. Might be a unit that acts as a bit more of a counter-charge unit, or perhaps is one of the best ones to load up in a transport. Moving on to fast attack next, and we have the Hernkyn Pioneers. These guys are a fast attack choice for 30 points per model, 3 to 6 models per unit. They do have the core keyword, get Obsec as per the core Codex rules, and they do have fly as well, allowing them to jump over terrain, which is pretty handy. I was thinking that they might represent low ground skimmers, so might not get the keyword, but it seems that they do. On top of that, they also have the accelerated and concussion keywords, both of which can be handy for certain stratagems. As for their stat line, their 12-inch move, hitting on 3s, strength 4, toughness 5, 3 wounds, 3 attacks, leadership 8 and a 4+ save. They do get void armor, but still I don't think that they're one of the tougher units in the Codex, not too hard to kill for most units firing at them. Interestingly, they're all the same defensive profile, including the big one with the massive cannon on it. The big one with the cannon does get an extra attack in combat though, not that that's the biggest deal. At base, even the standard ones are fairly covered in armaments. Typically you'll usually be firing with the Magna Coil autocannon and the bolt shotgun. The autocannon's a 3-shot autocannon with the hunter profile at 24 inches, and the bolt shotgun's a 12-inch shot with 2 shots, strength 5, AP minus 1, and damage 1. That's okay damage output I think. Autocannons are good against certain, but there's a lot of things that counter them quite well. Otherwise they get a bolt revolver for when they're in combat, and concussion grenades, which is good for the keyword, but I think you wouldn't usually want to throw them due to the other shots being better. The biggest and most exciting model in the unit is the one that can pack the big and dangerous weapon. This one's just a very small 10-point upgrade over the standard biker, so it's just massively auto-include. You get the choice of either a high-las rotary cannon or an ion beamer. The rotary cannon for just 10 points is a 24-inch shot, Hunter 9, Strength 6, AP minus 2, damage 1. That's a very solid anti-infantry profile there, and can punch up against tanks with Judgement Tokens like just about everything in the Codex. The ion beamer is a beam weapon at 18 inches, 2 shots at Strength 7, AP minus 2, and damage 2. Seems worse than the rotary cannon quite significantly in my opinion. I guess though this is one of the units that might actually be able to skewer multiple units quite reliably if you can line up the shots. I guess if you're hitting 3 different units with this, it could be more worth it. Otherwise, the ones without the big guns can take upgrades, 5 points for a searchlight, which allows you to ignore dense cover, plus gives you the keyword for a stratagem to bestow a judgment token, 5 points for a panspectral scanner to ignore light cover, plus the keyword for Auspex scan, and then 5 points for that comms array again 24 inches worth of Kahl rerolls, plus the keyword for ignores auras. Finally, as Ranger Outriders, they do get a pre-game move. They get to move up to 12 inches, staying greater than 9 inches away from enemies or their deployment zone. Could allow them to take some better positions. I think you'd want to play with them quite carefully though, as they're going to be a unit that's quite expensive, so not so expendable, and not really all that hard to kill at range or in melee. Still though, I think there's enough here to be pretty useful. Their shooting does hit pretty hard, provided you can try and keep them safe, and being a fast unit with Obsec and the potential to advance an extra 12 inches is pretty crazy. The other choice for the fast attack is the Sagitaur. This is basically the equivalent of a Votann Razorback in my opinion, but it seems to be in fast attack, not transport, at least at the moment. These things cost 110 points base, and interestingly they have the ability to take two models within a single slot. You deploy them within 6 inches of each other, and then they operate independently. They're a vehicle, have that accelerated keyword, and aren't core, and their transport capacity is pretty peculiar. They can transport 5 infantry models, nothing in exosuits or exoframes, so usually going to be Cthonian Beserks or Hearthkyn Warriors. Weirdly, this transport gives the Hearthkyn Warriors a sort of combat squad ability, where pre-game you can select a unit of 10 of them, break them into two 5-man squads, and then deploy one of those squads in two different Sagitaurs. Kind of interesting, gives them a stealth option where they can be taken in 5 model units if you so wish. I guess in theory that could be something like 165 points for a fairly cheap little transport with a unit inside, and potentially could pack at least some fairly scary weapons with the Hearthkyn Warrior options. In any case, for the rest of this guy's stat line, he's a 12-inch movement, hits on 3s, toughness 7 with 9 wounds, 3 attacks, and a 3+ save with void armor. It doesn't look like it's incredibly tough for the points to be honest, again kind of similar to the Space Marine Razorback, though it does have 1 less wound. It is perhaps surprisingly heavily armed though. It gets the twin bolt cannon as base, 6 shots at strength 6, AP -2 and damage 2. That's really quite a nice generalist profile. And then it's got one of 4 options on the top gun, a high las beam cannon for 20 points, heavy 2 at 24 inches, strength 9, AP -3 and damage d6 with the beam special rule. Now there's a profile that if you can manage to hit multiple units with it, that is going to deal some major damage. That could be quite a lot of las cannon hits there. There's then the L7 missile launcher, which is free and the same profile as the Hearthkyn, a matter autocannon which is 24 inches, heavy strength 7, AP -2 and damage 2, another very good generalist profile to go with that bolt cannon. With all that damage 2 shooting, it does seem pretty great damage output out of this thing, even if you just used it as a gunboat. Finally, there's the option of a Sagitaur missile launcher. That one costs +10, 36 inches, heavy 2 shots, strength 10, AP -3 and damage 3. Kind of feels like a Space Marine Typhoon launcher on steroids. I guess as a transport it could be handy for vomiting out a unit of Cthonian Beserks at the enemy, though I do feel like if you're zooming this up towards the enemy it's going to get killed pretty quickly. It might just genuinely be a better idea to try and keep it back and keep those guns firing for multiple turns, as the damage profile does seem pretty solid. The main gun variants all look pretty tempting, maybe with the exception of the missile launcher perhaps. The beam cannon and the autocannon maybe have slightly better damage, but the Sagitaur missile launcher does have range going for it. Heavy support next, and first up we've got the Brokhyr Thunderkyn. These are the Votann engineers in exoframe armor, 35 points base with 3 to 6 models in the unit. They have the exoframe keywords, so take up more space in certain transports, and are core infantry. Their stat line's fairly chunky, they hit on 3s, strength and toughness 5, 3 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 8 and a 3+ save with void armor, so perhaps feel fairly akin to a Space Marine Gravis armor in terms of being that hard to take down. Weapons-wise, they're basically going to be Votann Devastators to some extent. They either get the option of a bolt cannon, graviton blast cannon, or SP conversion beamer. The bolt cannon's 3 shots at Hunter 3, strength 6, AP -2, damage 2. A fairly nice generalist profile there, but maybe not super strong for 35 points. Feels like you really need to get value out of core buffs to make that worth it maybe. The graviton blast cannon I think is maybe a bit more exciting. It's d6 shots at strength 5, AP -3, damage 2, and it becomes damage 3 against 3+ save targets. Definitely better damage outputs, though having to get within 18-inch range to use it does mean that they risk being locked up. At least Leagues of Votann have a 1 CP stratagem to fall back and shoot, I guess. Finally, the SP conversion beamer is the high value one. That one costs 5 points extra, and is a single shot with the beam weapon rule at 30 inches, strength 7, AP -2 and damage 3. The conversion beam weapons in this codex appear to have an extra rule where if you hit the target at greater than half range, they get an extra hit. Again, depends on how much your opponent lines up for you. I guess in theory, if you can fire at 2 units within that bracket, you'd be getting 4 shots at strength 7, AP -2 and damage 3, which does seem by far the strongest damage profile. Finally, they get Omni Visors, which allows them to ignore dense cover but not light cover, perhaps a bit of a twist on the similar rule for the Space Marine Centurions perhaps, so they should normally be hitting on 3s. Overall, I'm perhaps a little uncertain for what to make of these. I guess fairly long range firepower that can make great use of Judgement Tokens really doesn't hurt. They aren't the most expensive unit ever, but at least compared with some of the other units in the book, they do seem to be a little bit on the low damage output side, or at least lower than I might have expected for a slow moving gunline unit that doesn't really do anything else besides deal damage. Lastly, for data sheets, before we get into characters, we have the mighty Hekaton Land Fortress, which I did cover in its own unit review. This thing's basically the equivalent of a Votann Land Raider, a big hefty tank that's really hard to kill, covered in guns, and has a decent transport capacity. It's a heavy support unit for 230 points, gets the accelerated vehicle and land fortress keywords, and has a stat line that's not too dissimilar from a Land Raider itself: 10-inch move, hits on 3s, strength and toughness 8, 16 wounds, 6 attacks, and a 2+ save with void armor. Very nice on the 2+ armor. Weapons wise, it does pack rather a lot of fairly scary guns. The main weapon, you either get a cyclic ion cannon, which can be swapped out freely for a heavy magna rail cannon or an SP heavy conversion beamer. The ion cannon's 3d3 shots at strength 8, AP -2, damage 2, so quite a good generalist one there. But I feel like most people might be taking the rail cannon, perhaps one of the single strongest and scariest guns in the book. A single shot at 36 inches, strength 14, AP -4, and damage 2d3+6, an average of 10 wounds if you get your damage through. And as a rail weapon, it'll ignore the invuls, and those 6s to wound would cause excess damage not to be lost. 10 wounds split out potentially over 10 infantry models, or 5 space marines maybe. The thing looks absolutely terrifying when combined with 3 Judgement Tokens for a 4+ to make that happen, plus maybe re-rolling the shots to give you even more chance. If you did manage to get those stars to align, that'd be a 3 out of 4 chance of getting the shot that kills entire squads in one shot. Otherwise, the final option is the heavy SP conversion beamer, 30 inches, Hunter 2, strength 8, AP -3, and damage 4, and again it's a beam weapon that scores extra hits if the target's greater than 15 inches away. Again, you need to be outside that 15-inch range bracket and maybe skewer 2 different units with the beam, but if you manage to do so, that looks like it should be solidly more effective than the cyclic ion cannon most of the time. In reality though, I think I would take that railgun. Otherwise, it also gets a matter auto cannon, 6 shots at strength 7, AP -2, and damage 2, a nice little secondary weapon, and then it's got 4 turrets that can either be bolt cannons at 2 shots, strength 6, AP -2, and damage 2, interestingly a different profile to the Thunderkyn ones, or they can be swapped out for ion beamers for 5 points each, 18-inch 2-shot hunter weapons, strength 7, AP -2, damage 2, and beam. I feel like they could perhaps be actually quite interesting en masse. If you did manage to line up 2 units in the row for this, then that would actually be quite a lot of hits between 4 different beam weapons. Maybe though it might just be best to double down on all the bolt weapons and the railgun, and just have this hovering around 24 to 36 inches. Finally, it gets a back-mounted option that's either a pan-spectral scanner for ignore light cover plus intercept for 2 CP, or you can swap that out for one of 3 different one-shot warheads, kind of similar to a big bad Votann hunter-killer missile that also ignores line of sight. There's one for d6 damage 2 shots that wounds vehicles on a 4+ and becomes damage 3, one with 2d6 anti-infantry shots at strength 6, AP -2, damage 1, and one for a great big anti-tank shots at 1 shot at strength 10, AP -3, and a big damage 6. I think it's kind of hard to weigh them up. It's either more Alpha Strike versus a ignores cover all game long, which could be pretty handy on all those bolt cannons. I feel like you could justify either the ignores cover or the missiles. Finally, it does have a transport capacity of 12 models, exo armor counts as 2, exo frames count as 3. Maybe could be a solid option for delivering Cthonian Beserks, or perhaps getting those grav cannons of the Thunderkyn in range, as it's one of the few things that can make them get a bit more mobility. Overall though, this thing seems strong enough to justify itself purely as a gun platform. It's very tough for the points with that stat line and void armor. I could easily see 2 or 3 of them trundling around the backfield, blasting things with those railguns, and being a thorough menace until the opponent does get to chew through the profile. Last up, let's go into the HQ section. The Votann have 5, and we'll go through their character upgrades after. In general though, I feel like all the Votann HQs are really good value for their cost. For how cheap they are, I think we could easily see people spending something like 300 or 400 points of characters and getting a massive amount of value from them. First up we have the Kahl, a pretty standard captain type model for the Votann, 70 points base, hits on 2s with strength and toughness 4, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 9, and a 3+ save with a 4+ invul. Very similar to a standard marine captain stat line in Ds. Wargear wise, he has the choice of 2 different crests, either a teleport crest that can allow him to deep strike and then use a 1 CP stratagem to bounce around the board, or the rampart crest which costs 10 points more, gives you the shield crest keyword, but also a really powerful aura where they give a 6-inch aura of 5+ invuls to nearby infantry and bikes, though that aura range can't be increased by any mechanism. That one seems like it's a really good one if you want to make masked up Hearthkyn Warriors work, I guess. On a 4+ save model, even with the void armor, that 5+ invul is going to be invaluable. Otherwise, in combat, you have the choice of either a Forge Wrought Plasma Axe, that one's Strength 5, AP -3, Damage 2, seems solid enough, or a Mass Gauntlet for +10, Strength 7, AP -3, and Damage 3 with a -1 to hit. I guess that out of the two, that one's probably going to be worth the upgrade, can at least allow him to threaten things like Terminators or heavy hitters. For his ranged weapons, he's got the option of a Autok Combi Bolter, a 24-inch Hunter 4-shot with Strength 4, AP -1, Damage 1, or a Vulcanite Disintegrator, the same one as the Exo Armor get, the 3 shots with the mortal wounds to hit on 6s. His combat stat line's okay, the Invul Save buff is very good, but he also has 2 pretty great command abilities beyond that. Kindred Hero is the standard reroll ones to hit for core units within 6 inches, Captain style rerolls, kind of okay but not standout. Useful that with that comms array you could be getting them all the way out to 24 inches, making it quite handy to have one of him on the board. Grim Efficiency though allows you to dole out Judgement Tokens easily. You do this in the command phase and just hand out a Judgement Token to one unit within line of sight of him. The timing though maybe is a little bit problematic, as it's command phase it means that you don't get to move before you issue them, which might limit the exact units that you can bestow them on. Still though, if you're somewhere that's broadly central and screened by your other units, you might still have a pretty decent option. Unless the entire enemy army manages to hide, it's likely going to be making something a bit easier to kill. In any case though, somewhere between 70 and 90 points for that collection of buffs seems rather good, plus he's got pretty decent combat stats when the enemy do get to him. He seems like a really easy include in the army. There is an option to upgrade him to a high Kahl as well, which also seems very nice. We'll get onto that with the character upgrades later. The only unique character of the book is Uthar the Destined, basically a unique high Kahl for 140 points. He's locked to the Great Arthurian League, and he's got the high Kahl keyword, but he isn't a Votann Supreme Commander or anything. Stats wise, he's got inflated strength, toughness, wounds, and attacks compared with a normal Kahl, and he does look like he'd be ridiculously hard to shift as a special character, as multi-damage attacks become damage 1 against him, so you're not going to be swatting him with a single very high damage attack. In terms of buffs, he gets that Rampart Crest for the 5+ save, the Kindred Hero rerolls, Grim Efficiency Judgement Tokens, the High Kahl rerolls which he can bestow on one unit for 4 rerolls to hit, and a rather fun special rule called Ancestral Fortune. Once per battle round you get to change a hit, wound or saving throw for him or a Great Arthurian League unit within 6 inches to become an unmodified 6. It's pretty powerful on all sorts of different rolls that, but it seems extra good on that massive railgun that you can get on the Land Fortress. That basically just dials in a 6 to hit, which would become a 6 to wound provided your target's got 1 Judgment Token, so can activate the splash damage. Otherwise, in combat, he's got at least a bit of threat. It's going to be Strength 6, AP -4, and Damage 2, and 6s to hit cause 2 mortal wounds and the attack sequence ends. That goes up to 3 mortal wounds if the target has a Judgment Token. In general, I'd say he's a lot more of a tough and buffing character as opposed to one that's really going to put too much smack down himself, but still his combat stats aren't exactly bad. I think if you were taking a high Kahl in Great Arthurian League, this guy seems like he's the one to go for. Some nice equipment boosts, and the Ancestral Fortune rule does seem a bit too strong to pass up. Next up, we've got the Votann's Priest/Psyker, a Grimnyr. These ones are cloned Psykers that use the Skein-wrought discipline, 80 points per model. He gets the Shield Crest keyword and also has 2 core cog robots flying alongside him. Stats wise, he maybe isn't desperately standout. A Strength and Toughness 4 character with 4 wounds, hits on 3s, and has a staff that's Strength 7, AP -2, and Damage D3. It's not going to do a crazy amount in melee, and those 2 Corvs can chip in with 2 shots at Strength 4, AP -1, Damage 1, each of them hitting on 4s. Really, he's here to be screened by your units and deliver psychic buffs or mortal wounds. He casts 2 powers, or 3 if you upgrade him to the Botanic Council upgrade. He nodes 2 Skein-wrought powers and Smite, and if he suffers perils of the warp, it destroys a Corv, and no other ill effects are taken. We'll go through the Skein-wrought powers later, but in general there are a few good ones. There's a nice easy one to farm command points, a powerful one to strip invul saves, a few witch fires, and one that makes a unit quite a lot tougher. Finally, he's also got a rule called Grimnyr's Regard, a 6-inch aura of +1 combat attrition. I guess doesn't hurt if he was in the middle of a whole bunch of ranked up Hearthkyn Warriors. Next up, we've got the Einhyr Champion, a 90 points HQ choice that's all about the big melee punches. It's got a few fun keywords, including Einhyr for a +1 to hit stratagem, accelerated for a big 12 inches advance if he wants it, an exo armor that gives him -1 damage, and also -1 to wound in melee from a ram shield. His stat line is pretty beefy, and he does outfight quite a lot of characters in 40k at the moment. A 5-inch move, hits on 2s, strength and toughness 5, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 9 and a 2+ save, and he also will often take that Weaverfield crest, an extra wound and a 4+ invul to keep him safer. Otherwise he could take a teleport crest, but I suspect that the Weaverfield one for the extra durability is the way to go. Weapon wise, he can either take a Darkstar Plasma Axe for +1 strength, AP -3, damage 1, and double attacks. That attack ignores any rules that allow ignoring wound rolls, so feel no pains and damage caps, or he can just take the sturdy Mass Hammer, -1 to hit but strength ×2, AP -3, and a crazy damage D3 +3. The hammer's an extra 10 points, but it does mean that he's going to be able to pound tanks into the ground, particularly with certain Warlord Traits and Relics. Otherwise, besides raw melee might, he also has Mass Driver Accelerators, Impact Mortal Wounds where you roll a d6, if it equals or exceeds the enemy toughness they get d3 mortal wounds, doesn't hurt. He also has an Autok Pattern Combi Bolter for 4 Hunter shots at AP -1, and he does actually come with a buff as well, allowing reroll 1s to wound for Einhyr Hearthguard, so it's a little bit better when run alongside them, I suppose. Overall, really quite terrifying. It does seem like he outfights a lot of current 40k champion models, particularly with that -1 to wound and -1 damage. In a previous video, we had him fight up against an Emperor's champion, and he wins very handily. I guess delivering him into the fight might be the challenge. I suspect he's going to be best used as just a lurking combat threat within the ranks. Lastly, for the HQ choices, we have the Brokhyr Ironmaster, 80 points for this guy, and again he looks like an HQ with really good value for the points. He comes as a little character unit with him, 1 Ironkin assistant, and 3 ECOGs. His main purpose is to repair vehicles for D3 wounds a turn. You get +1 to the roll if there's any ECOGs left, and you also can give +1 to hit for a core or vehicle unit within 9 inches when they make ranged attacks. Just for the buffs alone, that seems well worth it at 80 points to be honest. And he also has an okay profile himself, not all that tough with only 4 wounds and a 4+ save, but some actually fairly decent damage, a Graviton rifle with 3 hunter shots at strength 5 AP -3 damage 2, and that goes to damage 3 against 3+ save targets. Then in melee he's also got a very similar profile on a Graviton hammer, that one will be strength 8, AP -2 damage 2, and again that goes to damage 3 versus 3 up saves. The ECOGs are 1 wound little servitor type things, maybe not quite as tough as they look. They've only got the 1 wound and the 4+ save. One's got an Autok Bolt Pistol, one a Plasma Torch for a damage 2 melee attack, and 1 Manipulator Arms for 2 attacks at damage 1. Their main purpose is helping the repairs and being ablative wounds. They are ignored for morale. Finally, there's the Ironkin Assistant, toughness 4, 2 wounds and a 4+ save. He's got a little Las Beam Cutter, a 1-shot pistol at strength 6, AP -3, damage 1, and he allows the unit to do actions while advancing or after they've shot. Could be handy for any actions that they need to do. He seems like another reasonable choice to take damage on if you need to. Overall, this guy's actually got some okay shooting, particularly if you take his upgraded version. Seems fairly auto-include if you're running a couple of land fortresses, make their damage output a lot better, and repair a lot of wounds on them, all while staying safe and having a bit of damage output of his own. That's it for the datasheets. As I mentioned, I do feel like all the characters are pretty standout. Otherwise, I feel that Hearthkyn Warriors are going to get played a lot. They are the main troops choice after all, and I feel like perhaps the other really scary on paper datasheet is that Land Fortress, the biggest and toughest unit in the list, plus packing a railgun that just deletes things no questions asked. Otherwise, most of the rest feel kind of merely okay. Certainly solid enough stat lines, and I guess they are amped up by Void Armor and those Judgement Tokens, so are going to be more annoying to remove and more dangerous than their stock profile really implies. Moving on though, let's get into all the support that these Votann datasheets can use. Let's go through stratagems first, and we'll start off with battle tactics. Accelerated response gives you a 12-inch advance for accelerated units. That's the bikes, the champion, and the vehicles. Very nice to make late game objective grabs perhaps, or just stay super safe turn 1. For 1 CP there's Ancestral Sentence. That's the Judgement Token one, where for 1 CP any Votann unit can reroll all hits against a unit with a Judgement Token. That one really is pretty brutal to be honest, as it would combine very nicely with the auto wounds thing. Pretty crazy that you can have that on the biggest and scariest units in the army. I think that one's going to get used an awful lot. It's a massive direct increase in damage. For 1 CP there's Core Burst of Fire Pattern. 1 unit hit by a beam weapon takes 1 mortal wound on a 4+ each time it's hit by another beam weapon this phase, to a maximum of 6. Seems like that's maybe one for the land fortress if you go down the full beam route. Could actually be stacking a fair few mortal wounds I suppose. For 1 CP, Cyberstim Infusion is a Beserks one, reroll hits in melee, always nice with the -1 to hit profile of those hammers. For 1 CP, Hunter's Mark means a single shot can auto hit an enemy with a Judgement Token. Great on anything with a massive amount of damage, I suppose, though often just re-rolling hits or something might be almost as effective. For 2 CP, there's Kin Bond. 2 Votann core units with an engagement range of the same enemy unit get to re-roll wound rolls. I guess maybe a little bit clunky to set up, but maybe if you had multiple Exo Armor units or Exo Armors plus Berserkers, then that could well be worth it. For 1 CP, there's Optimized Volley. Exploding sixes for bolt weapons, so good on massed up Hearthkyn Warriors perhaps. Against 11 plus models it becomes 2 extra hits, so it would seem like really good value against them. For 2 CP we've got Point Blank Fusillade. At the start of your shooting phase, 1 Votann infantry or biker unit gets to fire in melee, -1 to hit with any heavy weapons, not that they have them, and it means that Votann firepower just generally isn't going to get locked up all that much. There's also 1 for fall back and shoot, so you're basically going to guarantee the output of some big ranked up units. Maybe makes Hearthkyn Warriors a bit more viable. For 1 or 2 CP there's Reactive Reprisal. A Votann core unit gets to return fire against an enemy unit after being shot, provided the unit that shot them has a Judgement Token. Getting an out of sequence shooting attack is pretty brutal, to be honest. This really seems like one that the enemy could mess up on. Maybe just ping a couple of wounds into a unit and then not expect a massive firepower response. This stratagem really is a crazy strength boost. Again, looks really nasty on big core units, either a big block of Terminators, 20 Hearthkyn Warriors, or a unit of 6 bikes. Rounding up the first half, we've got 3 requisition stratagems. There's the standard ones for extra Warlord Traits and Relics. You get up to 2 extra in Strike Force if you want them. And then there is a Sergeant Relic upgrade, 1 CP called Bequest of the Votann. Thane or Hesier models can take the Grey Crest, Grudge's End, the Heart Fist, or Warp Strike, relics that we'll get onto in a second. Moving on through the stratagems though, for 1 CP we have Familial Loyalty. Infantry or biker units can heroic intervene, another really powerful one to have army wide there. It means that your opponent would have to back off and not stay too close to them unless they want to be in combat. For 1 CP we've got Light 'em Up. A searchlight unit, namely those bikes, can select a unit and it gains 1 Judgement Token. Not bad if you need an extra one in a pinch, I suppose. For 1 CP we've got Luck Has, Need Keeps, Toil Earns. One of the Votann sayings apparently. You use this in your movement phase till the end of your next. A core infantry unit gets a 6+ Feel No Pain, auto passes morale, and ignores most enemy rules that allow it to stop actions, so the only things that stop you doing the actions are shooting and fighting. A bit of a weird composite one, seems like a fairly reasonable one, maybe on some Hearthkyn pushing towards a central objective though. For 1 CP we've got Mag Riders. In the enemy shooting phase, a Votann biker unit gets -1 to hit. If it advanced last turn, they also can't re-roll hits either. A bit of extra durability if you need some Hernkyn to survive. For 1 CP we've got Newfound Nemesis. If your Warlord's killed, then the unit that killed it gains 2 Judgement Tokens, or if it was a Grimnyr that got killed, it gains 3. Opportunistic, but could be handy. For 1 CP we've got Outflanking Pioneers. A Hernkyn unit that's more than 6 inches from the enemy and less than 6 inches from the Bourne edge can return to strategic reserve in the movement phase. It does mean that they have to take a turn off the board though, they don't come back the same turn. Still could be useful enough late game if you desperately need some lines of sight or something. For 1 CP we've got Well Ordered Retreat. A core unit can fall back and shoot. Again, like many of these, this is just really handy to have army wide. Great for Hearthkyn Warriors or the Exo Armor perhaps, and the bikes. Moving on to Epic Deeds, for 2 CP we have Grimwrought Barrier. This one is the Grimnyr one, and it means that 1 Votann unit within 9 inches of the Grimnyr can't be affected by enemy maledictions, and current ones get turned off. It doesn't give you any defense against mortal wounds, it would seem, just against debuffs. Seems very niche indeed for 2 CP, but occasionally it might be worth the cost. For 1 CP we've got Bastion running. A land fortress fights on full profile if it's bracketed. If it makes it go from a third bracket to a top bracket, then that's great. For 1 CP we've got Combat Surgery. This one's a medic unit one that restores D3 models to the Hearthkyn Warrior unit. 1 CP for an average of 2 11-point models per turn seems okay. Plus, as it's done in the command phase, it might allow you to do gamey things like stretch out towards an objective before they're scored. For 1 CP we've got Personal Grudge. One of your characters nominates an enemy unit in the command phase. That character's attacks count as 3 Judgement Tokens against that unit for the rest of the game. This one feels like a really fun and usable one, either for a melee Kahl, the Einhyr Champion, or maybe even that Brokhyr Engine Master with his big grav rifle. It feels very cinematic and dwarfen, and it does seem to be a pretty powerful damage boost if you just need to absolutely hammer something to death in combat. Finally, we've got War Gear stratagems. The concussion grenade one is Concussion Blast, used in the shooting phase within a unit within 6 inches of a keyworded unit. The Hernkyn and the Hearthkyn both have these, and that unit will be -1 to hit and can't overwatch or set to defend. Seems usable to me, particularly if you do need to charge them. For 1 or 2 CP we've got Ion Storm. Ion weapons cause 1 mortal wound on a 6 to wound. It costs 2 CP if it's 11 plus models, and it does seem like it could be most useful on the Hearthkyn units. I guess that's 10 shots for 1 CP. You might well have a fair few 6s to wound with Judgement Tokens. If you did shoot them against a unit with 3 Judgement Tokens, in theory that'd average you 5 mortal wounds even with no other buffs. It seems like that stratagem could actually be a pretty reasonable argument for using mass ion weapons. For 2 CP we've got Subterranean Explosives. This one's a debuff ability for that Cthonian Beserks mole launcher, the one pictured top right. The actual attack gets -1 to wound, so it's not going to be doing too much damage, but if you hit a unit, then it halves its movement and fights last. 2 CP is a touch on the pricey side for that, but handing out fights last is a pretty handy debuff. Maybe just having access to that could be a reasonable argument for including the mole launcher. For 2 CP, there's Multi-Wave System Jammer. This is the comms array one that you can take on Hernkyn and Hearthkyn. You can actually use it in any phase, and one unit within 12 inches of this unit can't use any aura abilities until the phase ends. Kind of depends on just how powerful those aura abilities are. If there's some mad damage buffs, it could be nice to turn them off. Could be good for getting rid of certain defensive things too. Still though, 2 CP is quite pricey just for one phase. Next we've got 1 or 2 CP for Overcharged Shield Crest. This one applies to a Thane model that has a shield crest in it. It gives transhuman physiology to the units, can't be wounded on a 1 to 3, and it costs 2 CP if there's 6 or more models there. I guess a solid one for certain characters. Seems like it's quite efficient on things like the Einhyr Hearthguard as well. They'd have 5 tough models that you can use it on for 1 CP. For 2 command points, we've got Panspectral Warning. This is basically a Votann Auspex scan. Intercept a unit arriving within 12 inches of a unit with a scanner. That could be the Hearthkyn, the Hernkyn, or potentially the Land Fortress, and it does give you a bit of a 12-inch deep strike exclusion zone. Maybe a bit more useful for area denial, perhaps. And finally, we have Site-to-Site Teleport, 1 or 2 CP, and you teleport a teleportation unit anywhere that's 9 inches from the enemy. 1 CP if it's a character, 2 CP if it's something else like those Hearthguard. A free redeploy is really quite cool. I quite like the idea of maybe using it on something like those Hearthguard jumping across the board. You could maybe have a unit of 10 of them, soup them up with high Kahl 4 rerolls to hit, drop them somewhere 9 inches of the enemy, and open up with loads of grenade launcher and vulcanite shots, then hopefully attempt a risky 9-inch charge. Not sure if it's the best idea in the world, but it certainly seems fun and fairly dangerous on paper. Overall though, I do think that the stratagem section looks very strong indeed for the Votann. They'd have to spend their command points wisely, but there's a ton of really great options here. Ancestral Sentence for the hit rerolls seems absolutely amazing as a damage buff for 1 CP. That's going to get used a lot. Having options to shoot in melee or fall back and shoot are both great on a faction with close ranged guns. I think Reactive Reprisal again will be a stupidly annoying stratagem for enemies trying to shoot your Votann to death. They might not be able to afford to attack a dangerous unit with light weapons if they don't think that they can kill a meaningful amount of them. Familial Loyalty for army-wide heroic intervention is great, and a lot of the squad or war gear specific ones are pretty usable in the right situation. Definitely with this good stratagems on the board, it does seem like a Grimnyr farming out those command points seems almost an auto-include. Otherwise though, moving on, let's talk character upgrades, and first up we have the Warlord Traits. I'd say perhaps this might be one of the weaker sections of the book, though some of them are certainly usable. Ancestral Bearing gives you an extra 3 inches to command phase or aura abilities, goes up to a maximum of 12 inches, maybe could spread Kahl rerolls a bit further. It doesn't work on the nice invul safe shield though. Warrior Lord is quite a nice one for a fighty character. Reroll wounds in melee, and their wound rolls ignore feel no pain and damage caps. The reroll wounds I think is good enough just to warrant the include in itself, pretty good on mid-strength weapons. A long list is a Judgement Token manipulation one. When you kill an enemy unit with a Judgement Token with any model in your army, you get to redistribute one of those Judgement Tokens to another unit that the Warlord can see. Provided you can kill something each turn, that could add up to anything around an extra 3 to 5 Judgement Tokens over the course of the game. And as an added bonus effect, you also get your ranged attacks to ignore cover and ignore Lookout Sir if the target has a Judgement Token themselves. Ignoring Lookout Sir could be interesting with the Brokhyr, could actually turn their grav rifle into a bit of a sniper. Guild Affiliate is a buff for 1 core unit within 6 inches. It gains Obsec or counts as an extra model each if it already had it. Good if you want to put that on something tough like those Einhyr Hearthguard perhaps. I feel like that will be the optimal use of that one. Unrelenting Toil is a 6-inch aura for core units to shoot while doing actions. If your secondary game plan involves actions, then also that one's absolutely fine. Finally, Grim Demeanor is a 6-inch core aura of ignores modifiers to leadership and combat attrition, and I think that we've spotted the one that's almost certainly not going to get taken. Out of these, I feel like maybe Warrior Lord for damage, a long list for Judgement Tokens, and perhaps Guild Affiliates for the OBSEC on Einhyr. Those seem to be the ones that stand out the most to me. The Votann have far more options for relics though. I guess they are space-dwarves, so they do enjoy forging things, and a few of them are rather exciting. Actol's Fortress is a shield crest one that makes one unit within 3 inches fights last, never hurts on a fighty character, seems great on a champion or a Kahl. Ancestral Crest is one that gives you 0 CP for an epic deed stratagem. I guess that'd either be Grimwrought Barrier or Personal Grudge. Personal Grudge seems fine on a combat character again. Once per game, you can change one hit, wound, or save to a result of a 6, and also on death, you can roll a d6. A 2 to 5 deals d3 mortal wounds, and on a 6, it deals 3. Another interesting one that could maybe go on a Brokhyr sniper character, guaranteeing that 6 and a Judgement Token seems pretty brutal. Next up, there's Exactor, a relic mass hammer, so strength times 2, AP minus 3, damage d3 plus 3. 6s to hit trade their damage for d3 plus 3 mortal wounds, a fairly brutal buff to the Einhyr Champion. If you do get 4 rerolls to hit, say from a high Kahl or the Kronos Hegemony Warlord trait, then this gets even better. The first knife is a Kahl or Grimnyr model upgrade. It gets plus 1 attack, and if it hits, it deals d3 mortal wounds and plus 1 mortal wound for each Judgement Token that the enemy has. Seems like an okay Kahl damage buff, to be honest. Would combine very powerfully with Personal Grudge for potentially 5 mortal wounds out of that one attack. Could certainly turn one of those characters into a bit of a hidden assassin. Warp Strike is a teleport model relic. It allows it to move through models or terrain. You can get a single free use of the site-to-site teleport stratagem for 0 CP, and also enemy units can't set up from deep strike reinforcements within 12 inches, so it isn't the worst to park on an objective. I'm not sure I'm super convinced on that one. Seems like it's trying to pull you in very different directions. The Half Fist is a mass gauntlet that's strength plus 4, so usually strength 8, AP minus 3, and flat damage 3. It doesn't have any minus 1 to hit, and it gets plus 1 damage if the target had any Judgement Tokens. If you want a very fighty Kahl, that's another very good option. The Murmuring Stave is a Grimnyr relic. It knows all the powers from the Scheme-wrought discipline. Really nice to have the crazy flexibility, and you can do an action while casting a power, which could be handy for secondaries. The Thyrikite Plate is a non-exo armor model relic. It gives you plus 1 to your armor save and plus 1 wound. Essentially, this would make your character a 2+ save model with the Armor of Contempt type rule. Definitely a lot harder to remove, and the extra wound doesn't hurt either. A bit of extra defense. Volum's Master Artifice is a Graviton rifle for the Brokhyr. It's actually got exactly the same stats as the regular Grav rifle. I've actually left out the important bit of this, which is that it has the beam characteristic. That means that you do have the chance to hit multiple units with that fairly powerful profile. Immer's Shield is an Einhyr Champion relic. Once per battle round you can change a failed save to damage 0, a good defensive buff. When you do, you roll a d6. On a 5+, then the attacking target gets a Judgement Token, which doesn't hurt. Flare is a Forge Right Plasma Axe, which becomes strength plus 2, AP minus 3, and damage 2, an extra pip of strength compared with the standard one, and also gives you a bonus 3 attacks. Seems like that could be pretty close in power to the better Gauntlet, a bit better versus 2 wound infantry, a bit worse versus tanks. Wayfarer's Grace allows you to regain 1 wound in each of your command phases, and when the model's killed, you've got a 3+ chance to resurrect at the end of the phase with d3 wounds remaining. Seems quite good on something that you'd want to play aggressively with, maybe like the Einhyr Champion. Could make him remarkably hard to kill and give him a last surge of attacks even after the opponent should have killed him, but I feel like you might just have been better just making him tougher or stronger to begin with. The Grey Crest is a shield crest model, -1 to hit if used by a character, or -1 to hit for the entire unit if the bearer is a non-character. The -1 to hit for the unit only applies at greater than 12-inch range, so ranged attacks from far away. But still, seeing as you can get, say, Einhyr Hearthguard with this, that's really quite a nice defensive ability just for 1 CP all game long. That one does look usable. Finally, there's Grudge's End, which is a bolt weapon. You get +1 damage, an extra AP -1, and if you hit with it, it auto wounds anything with a Judgement Token on it. As relic bolter type things go, that's actually really not too bad. You'd want to use it on the Autok pattern combi bolter for 4 shots. That'd be AP -2 and 2 damage, and usually auto wounding provided you can throw a Judgement Token out. Overall, a lot of these relics look very good indeed. I go so far as to say that the vast majority of them are usable. I guess some of my favourites might be Actol's Fortress. Fights Last is nice, The Relic Mass Hammer for the mortal wounds is nasty. The Murmuring Stave looks very tempting for a Grimnyr. The Grey Crest's pretty good for an Einhyr squad. And if you want a fighty Kahl, then you've got three very credible options, whether you want the knife, the axe, or the gauntlet. Psychic powers next, and for the Grimnyr we have the Skin Wrought Discipline. As mentioned before, Grimnyrs can usually cast twice, though you could theoretically be casting 3 of these a turn if you had the Votannic Council upgrade, plus that Relic Staff that allows you to know all the powers. Perhaps one of the most auto-include is Interface Echo, Warp Charge 5 that gains you 1 command point. It's weirdly immune to command point regeneration restrictions, which is a bit strange, though there's not really all that many other ways to farm them in the book. I think the Greater Therian League have a Warlord Trait. With the strength of the Stratagems, I basically consider this auto-include. I'm sure you can find something else useful for the other power. Fortify is a defensive boost, Warp Charge 6 and 12-inch range. A core character unit gets +1 toughness and a 6+ feel no pain. Looks good on most things, to be honest. Einhyr Hearthguard are perhaps the thing that come to mind the most. A big tough unit would like to be bigger and tougher, but maybe other things could be massed up Hearthkyn Warriors, Hernkyn, or perhaps even the Thunderkyn. Ancestral Wrath is a Warp Charge 6/1 that targets an enemy unit within 18 inches. You roll 3d6, each 4+ deals a mortal wound. You get to roll 6d6 if there's 11 or more models in the squad, and you get +1 to the roll if your target's got a Judgement Token on it. A fairly simple Witchfire, that one. Probably going to be around 2 mortal wounds if you do target something with a Judgment. Okay if you just need to double down in damage, maybe one to be used on the model with the staff. Grudgepire is a Warp Charge 4/1 with 18-inch range. You've got to target an enemy non-character vehicle or monster unit. You roll 2d6 and add to the Judgement Tokens. If the total is greater than their unmodified leadership, one model is just flat out destroyed. Occasionally this is going to be very good. You'd want to use it on something that's got a lot of wounds and at least a relatively low leadership, or is covered in Judgement Tokens. I suppose perhaps the optimum is if the stars align and you kill something like a big biker or a Space Marine Centurion or something. I don't think it's a power that I'd usually take out of selections though. Probably just want to use situationally if you do have a model with that staff. Next up, Null Vortex is interesting. Warp Charge 8, so hard to cast, 12-inch range, and you just remove the invul saved from a target. Really big if you're just about to follow that up with a charge from the Beserkers, the Hearthguard, or perhaps even the Einhyr Champion. It is hard and unreliable to cast though, unless you've upgraded to the Votannic Council of this miniature. Finally, we've got Crushing Contempt, Warp Charge 6 and 18-inch range, roll 3d6. If it at least equals the enemy leadership, then they can't do actions. If it's more than the enemy leadership, they're also -1 to hit. A little debuff there, not super strong. Overall, I'd say it maybe isn't the single strongest psychic discipline in the game. The command point farming does seem pure win to me though. Otherwise, perhaps Fortify or removing Invul seems to be the best value out of the discipline. Kind of depends on what you're facing. Even just farming out command points and belting out Smite each turn though doesn't really seem like the worst use of the model. He can chip in a tiny bit of ranged firepower with those corvs as he does so. Moving on, let's talk about the upgraded versions of the characters in the Votannic Council. This is a points cost upgrade that you can take one of each of, and it does seem to get you a fair bit more mileage out of the character datasheets, adding some significant extra buffs that change the way that the unit works, but for a fair number of extra points. I'd say all of them look usable to the extent where you might well want to field all of them in the same list. The base characters really aren't the most expensive. As well as giving you some flat buffs, it also gives you an extra Warlord trait that you can pick if you want to, some of which are also quite good and probably outcompete the standard ones from the table. First up, we've got High Kahl for 40 points extra, so the model will be clocking in at 110 points base. He has all the standard things that a Kahl has, but he also gains himself a command phase buff. One core character unit within 6 inches gets to reroll their hit rolls. Seems very nice on Hearthkyn, Hernkyn or Einhyr, and could switch just to amping up melee damage when characters get close. I think this one seems crazy powerful in combination with Judgement Tokens, as re-rolling hit rolls in full would allow you to get much more chance to get auto wounds. On top of that, you can also include both one High Kahl and one regular Kahl in the same detachment. That could be a way to allow you to double up on throwing out those Judgement Tokens through Grim Demeanor. And he's got a fun leads by example type rule, where if he actually kills a unit with a Judgement Token himself, he gets to redistribute that Judgement Token to another enemy unit. Could happen if he's super fighty, though I wouldn't necessarily be counting on that bit. Otherwise, he's got the option of a Warlord Trait Experienced Eye. This one allows him to use his Grim Efficiency one additional time, provided he targets a different unit, so 2 Judgement Tokens per turn coming out of this guy. Seems very solid. I wouldn't say absolutely mandatory, as just a cheap and effective Kahl could be what you need to go for, but potentially 4 rerolls and extra Judgement Tokens, both are good things. The Lord Grimnyr is an extra 25 points. This one allows him to cast an extra psychic power, so usually 3, though it doesn't let him know any more powers from the Skein-wrought discipline, so that extra power would often be Smite. It would combine nicely with the Staff of Knowing all the powers though. As well as that, he does also get a casting buff, +1 to cast if there's any enemy units with a Judgement token within 18 inches. That could be just what you need to get the Ignores Invul power off, so it seems like a really solid combo if you want to use that. Its Warlord trait is Ancestral Power, a +6-inch range to Skein-wrought powers, which could be interesting for Ignores Invuls at 18-inch range, I guess. I'm not really convinced on that being a massively strong trait though. Finally though, and I think maybe the best of the bunch for the points, is the Brokhyr Forgemaster. This one's a 25 point upgrade, so it makes the Brokhyr into a 105 point HQ. This one gives nearby units discounts on Wargear stratagems within him. A unit can use a Wargear stratagem for 1 command point less once per battle round. Some of the Wargear ones are pretty good. There's Overcharged Shield Crest for the Transhuman rule, so if you're supporting some Einhyr Hearthguard that could be quite nice, or it could be used to use site-to-site transport if you did have a unit that was going to go off teleporting early in the game, and to make that cost a bit less. Quite a few of the others are well usable situationally though. Besides that, 6s to wound against this model if you attack a Judgement token unit gets you the equivalent damage in mortal wounds. Again, that's really strong if you've got a target that's got lots of Judgement tokens, that way you're going to get more 6s to wounds, and against the right target with a good roll, you could theoretically just have something like 9 mortal wounds punched through with that Graviton rifle. It's pretty nuts. Otherwise, his Warlord trait is pretty awesome as well. Master Armourer allows you to regenerate 3 wounds when you're healing vehicles. That would mean 4 if you had those ECOGs still left in the unit. Plus, in an even crazier vehicle damage boost, it means that once per battle round, a failed save for an exo armor or vehicle unit within 6 inches is changed to damage 0. Again, that's a monumentally strong rule. It means that, say, if you were next to a land fortress and it took a melter shot and got d6 plus 2 damage, you could just say no, that isn't happening, and turn that damage off. I think in terms of character value in the book, the 105 point version of this guy with that Warlord trait sounds amazing. He can do a fair amount of damage himself from behind the lines and sit around next to some land fortresses, making them +1 to hit, healing 4 wounds on them each turn, save them some big damage, and also potentially even hand out free Wargear stratagems if there's any other units nearby. Overall, as mentioned, I think all 3 of these seem great, and pretty powerful that you could have all of them on the board for just over 300 points, which isn't really all that much to invest. Moving on, we come to the actual leagues themselves, so basically the Votann equivalent of Imperial Guard regiments or Space Marine chapters. It seems that each one gets a 2-part custom with 2 useful rules, then an ancestral judgment that helps out their Judgement token mechanic in some way, and then the usual options of 1 Warlord Trait, Relic, and Stratagem. First up, we've got the Trans-Hyperion Alliance. Their custom is that if a unit is lower than its starting strength, then they get +1 to hit. I guess incentivizes you to run in big squads of them. Unmodified 6s to hit cause an extra AP -1. That seems fairly broad both in range and in melee. And their Ancestral Judgment is they reroll wound rolls of 1 versus any targets with a Judgement token. I guess with Judgement tokens you will be making less wound rolls because you'll have auto-wounded some of them, but still that's a fairly flat damage buff against anything that you can hand one out to. Their Warlord trait is quite a good one. You get to redeploy 3 Trans-Hyperion Alliance units at the start of the game or put them in strategic reserve. Pretty good on quite a slow moving army like the Votann in my opinion. That could easily make the difference as to whether or not you get range on a unit first turn, or if you hide something that would normally be threatening, but might just get killed by an Alpha Strike if you can't hide it. Their Relic is a Grimnyr one, +1 wounds to their Corvs, so a little bit tougher, and if their Corv models are alive you get +1 to deny the Witch, and you can deny 1 more power. Pretty powerful psychic defense there if you want it. Finally, their Stratagem is a 1 command point 5+ save against mortal wounds, and to be honest, in current 40k, that really is a useful mechanic. I think that perhaps out of any of the things that can deal damage to them, mortal wounds are going to give the leagues of Votann the most trouble. For the points, most of the units tend to have actually fairly low wounds, whether it's Hearthkyn Warriors, Einhyr Hearthguard, or even big land fortresses. Mortal wounds are just a really efficient way of killing Votann, and having a pop-up save against them when you need it most is pretty cool. Overall, I'd say that their core customs just don't feel all that strong, but their support is pretty good. The Great Etherean League are the teal armoured Votann that we've seen in really quite a lot of places. They seem to be the poster Votann for the boxes. Their custom counts as 2 models for objectives, which is okay I suppose, but not enormously reliably so. A lot of the time it's just not going to matter. I guess it's kind of helpful for bigger vehicles though. The Land Fortress counts as 5. On top of that, they get a nice reroll 1 hit or 1 wound every time you shoot or fight. Really good for big high damage things like those Magna Rail rifles or the Railgun. and just doesn't really hurt in general. Their Ancestral Judgment makes any unit with one Judgment token count as basically having one extra. It means they're going to get massive damage increases really quickly if they can just spread a few single Judgment tokens around over much of the enemy army. And between that and the reroll, that does look like a very solid damage boost. Their Warlord Trait is pretty great, a 5+ chance to refund spent CP, excellent in combination with that Grimnyr's CP regen. Has the potential for 10 CP over the course of a game, which is massive. Their relic is Corvix Cuirass, that's a 4+ invul. It worsens AP by an extra 1, and it does stack with Void Armor. I would take that one on the Exo Armored Champion. It means that he'd be saving AP -3 attacks, even on a 3+. Finally, for 1 CP, we've got Appraising Glare. It means that Kahl's Grim Efficiency gains an extra Judgment token, meaning that stacked with that Ancestral Judgment, that would mean that basically it would count as 3 from attacks from these units. Really quite a powerful league, I guess, if you can just have a Kahl look at a unit and all of a sudden it's basically got 3 Judgment tokens for all intents and purposes. Overall, they just seem pretty strong, very dangerous in the damage department, an extra CP and a little bit of objective help. Moving on, we've got the Urani Surtur Regulates. Their custom gives them a slightly meh reroll failed morale, but also a rather excellent and interesting +1 toughness faction wide. Between that and Void Armor, that is going to make them hard to remove from the board. Exo Armor will be toughness 6, your basic Hearthkyn Warriors will be toughness 5, and the Mighty Land Fortress will go all the way up to toughness 9, which is pretty intimidating with their defensive profile and guns. Aside from that, their Ancestral Judgment counts every unit as having 1 Judgment token if they had 0. That means that 6s to hit will always auto wound, no small thing. It means that you don't have to make quite so much effort on the whole Judgment mechanic, as it's largely going to be at least a little bit sorted for you. The Warlord Trait gives you a 5+ Feel No Pain, a really nice survivability boost. Maybe could be good on the champion if you just want more durability than damage. Their relic is the Abiding Mantle. You can't be shot unless you're the closest target. Could be okay for a character who's trying to hold down a home field objective. And for 1 command point, they've got a nice character one called Waste Not Your Last Breath. Fights in death for a character that hasn't fought yet, with the good damage output that the Kahl and the Einhyr Champion can get. 1 CP for a bit of beatdown is pretty handy. In general, I feel like these might be a bit on the mid-tier side. The +1 toughness is really interesting, and the Judgment token thing is very useful, but besides that, maybe the rest of the bits just don't seem super great. Next up, we've got the Einhyr Conglomerate. Their custom is a +4-inch range of the guns, a 5+ invul save army wide, going up to a 4+ for 2+ save units, and their Ancestral Judgment gives you extra AP by -1 if you attack an enemy with a Judgment token within half range. I must admit, just on the raw army rules, I do really like this one. The +4-inch range to guns is going to be meaningful with Votann's slightly limited mobility, and a lot of their weapons being 18 inches or 24 inches, it is going to make a difference. Having invul saves army wide is a great durability boost. Pretty nuts to see that just on a standard chapter tactic. Excellent on anything that had a 4+ save like the Hearthkyn or the Hernkyn, and still very useful on things like the Land Fortress. If it gets hit by melter weapons or lances, then a 4+ invul save is going to be appreciated. The extra AP really doesn't hurt either. They've got lots of mid AP weapons at AP -1 or AP -2, and it could even be useful for the mighty high AP railgun. It gives you even less chance of the enemy getting any save whatsoever, even if they had a 2+ save or something. Otherwise, I'm maybe not as sold on their support options. The Warlord Trait gives you non-relic weapons a +1 damage. It's not awful, though largely isn't quite as interesting as other things. I think I'd be tempted by that on the Einhyr Champion with his axe. Getting 8 attacks at damage 2 might make that a bit more usable. At damage 1, they're just a bit sad compared with the hammer. The relic is the Last Crest of Jalog. A 4+ save versus mortal wounds doesn't hurt, and you also get a 3+ invul for 1 phase of the game, so at the moment when they're most likely to die, you can trigger that and make things a little bit easier to survive, kind of similar to the Armor Indomitus for Space Marines. Finally, for 1 CP, we've got Pulse Beam Discharge. 1 beam weapon deals 1 mortal wound per hit scored on the target. I guess if you've lined up a whole ton of targets along a beam weapons course, that could be rather powerful, and you don't really need massive amounts of beam weapons to be able to do so. I must admit, I do really quite like the passive buffs that this one has. It just seems like Leagues of Votann on a really good day. Extra range for engaging the enemy, extra durability via mass invul saves, and extra AP if you get close, which will be pretty meaningful. Finally, for the core leagues, we have the Cronus Hegemony. These seem to be the leagues of Votann that you want to unleash if you want to just go mass melee damage. Their custom gives you +1 attack and +1 strength in the first round of melee. 2 fairly brutal power boosts there, Things like those Beserks and the Einhyr Hearthguard will both really thank you for that. Both bits of the buff seem usable. As if that weren't enough, and if you did want to go, say, full Bloody Rose like the Sister of Battle, melee attacks also gain an extra AP -1 against any units with 2 or more Judgement Tokens. Extra attack, strength, and AP is just ridiculously dangerous. And then you can also double down on it with a 1 command point stratagem, 4 sixes to hit, causing 1 additional hit in combat. These guys really do seem to give you just some enormous melee damage, though they perhaps don't really help with the issue of how you actually get your units into combat in the first place. Otherwise, their Warlord trait is another fighty one, +1 attack and +1 to wound against characters or monsters, and also reroll hits in melee. Reroll hits in melee is a pretty great buff for Votann just on its own though, to be honest. It gives you a lot more chance to fish for those auto wounds, which is going to be a big deal. Finally, their relic is the Just Blade. It's an axe upgrade that's strength +1, AP -4 and damage 2, and ignores invul saves. It is good on a fighty Kahl maybe. Definitely could give you an edge over enemy characters in combat and gives you a lot of reliability. But even with the ignores invuls, I'm not sure it stands out enormously compared with a lot of the other very good combat relics. Overall though, if you just want super punchy leagues of Votann, this seems to be the way to go. I guess in theory you could even have some fairly punchy Hearthkyn Warriors with these guys. Strength 5, 3 attacks and AP -1 is actually somewhat threatening. I'm not 100% sure which one of these is going to emerge as any sort of tournament staple, but I must admit just from first glance I think the Games Workshop have done pretty well to make all of them interesting. I'm not super convinced about the Trans-Hyperion Alliance's customs, but redeploying units and the save against mortal wounds are great. The Thurian League has got great damage, command point regen, and access to Uthar. The Urani Surta Regulars have extra toughness and extra judgment tokens all around. The Einhyr Conglomerate have better shooting and 5+ invuls army-wide, and the Cronus Hegemony have heavy melee. I think if I had to guess, probably the Greater Thurian League and perhaps the Einhyr Conglomerate look like the best on paper. Maybe depends on the kind of army that you're trying to build though. Otherwise, you do have an option if you're not going for one of the main leagues as well. There is a custom league section called Established League Customs, and again you have to pick a 3-part custom, 2 of which from the first list of 4, and then 1 of which from the Ancestral Judgment list, the second list. From the standard customs, you've got +1 strength in the first round of melee, reroll failed morale tests, +1 to hit if your unit's below starting strength, and war songs. If 2 core units are engaged with an enemy unit, they can reroll all hits. Out of those, I feel like the +1 strength in the first round of combat seems like one of the best. The others just seem kind of situational to pull off or underwhelming even if you do. I don't think that these are going to be the best way to play. I'd probably just count your Votann as one of the main 5. I guess perhaps slightly more interesting are some of these Ancestral Judgments. You only get 1 of these though. First up we've got Vengeful. Enemies gain 2 Judgment Tokens when they kill a unit, not 1. If you're playing with lots of small units, that seems okay. Brutal Efficiency gives you exploding 6s in melee versus a unit with a Judgment Token. Doesn't hurt, a nice melee buff there. Close Quarters Prioritization gives you +2 to charge against Judgment Token units. Now that one is a rather interesting one, and perhaps the easiest way to deliver Votann into combat. It could be a fun little charge boost for something like Exo Armor, just after they've done a big teleport shunt across the board. Finally there's Taking It Personally. If you have 1 squad focus fire all against 1 enemy unit, you roll a d6 after doing so. On a 5+, they get a judgment token, and you get +1 to the roll if the unit being targeted is below half strength. That feels like it would be quite an easy way to hand out quite a lot of judgment tokens just randomly, but I feel like while these ancestral judgments are interesting enough, they're really let down by the lack of good other traits, and of course no access to things like Warlord Traits, Relics or Stratagems. Lastly, for the main content of the rules, we've got the Leagues of Votann Secondaries. In total, they've got 4 of them. Interesting that they have them in the book, but the Demons did not. Makes me wonder whether or not they'll bother including them for future releases. First up, we've got the Ancestors Are Watching, a No Mercy No Respite one. 2 victory points if you kill at least 1 enemy unit with a Judgment Token at the end of the phase, and you get an extra 1 victory point if a unit with 3 Judgment Tokens was slain. Generally, this feels like a spectacularly easy one to max out quickly, but at the end of the game you have a bit of a reckoning. Anything that had at least 1 judgment token and was not slain nets you -1 victory point, so if your opponent has 2 or 3 such units on the board, it seems unlikely that you're going to max it. Still though, unless things go very badly or your opponent's only got a few units on the table, this one seems like it could be a pretty reliable one for scoring 10+ victory points. Next up we've got Grudge Match. Choose 5 enemy units, 1 of which must be the Warlord. You get 1 victory point for killing them all, an extra victory point if the units that you selected cost 150 points or more, and an extra victory point if you killed them in melee. Again, you have a bit of a reckoning at the end of the game. For any that are still alive, you get -1 victory points on this secondary. You'd have to play a pretty heavy melee army, and even then, if the opponent manages to keep even one of those units safe from death, you're not going to score all that high. Next we have Prospects of Wealth, a Shadow Operations one. One Votann infantry or bike unit can do an action on an objective outside your deployment zone each turn. It starts at the end of the movement phase, and it completes at the end of your turn, and there must be no enemies on it when you start. You get 3 victory points when it's completed, plus you roll 1d6. On a 6+, you gain an extra 3 victory points. That goes up to a 5+ if your unit has a scanner. This one is interesting. The action's very easy to do, particularly with fast-moving Hernkyn as a thing that can do it, but it does mean that the opponent must have left the objective completely clear for you. They can deny it quite easily just by towing onto it and forcing you to kill them. The extra spoils thing is kind of fun, though very swingy. If you were doing it with scanner units, in theory each objective would be worth an average of 4 victory points, so you'd need to aim to get at least 3 of them done over the course of the game. Realistically, it just doesn't really seem much better than, say, Raise the Banners. I feel like you just might be a bit better off with that. That one seems like it'd guarantee you a few more points at least, and be a bit less subject to chance. Finally, we have Lay Claim, a Battlefield Supremacy one. The opponent sets up 3 objective markers. They've got to be greater than 6 inches from their deployment zone, greater than 6 inches from the board edge, and also greater than 9 inches from each other. It's a very swingy end of the game one, 5 victory points for each one of them that you control. I guess basically you're hoping that you table the opponent and stand on the objectives. If it looks like your list's going to be able to do that, then I guess it seems reasonable. It does feel like one of those secondaries where it's win harder if you're winning already though. And if the game is kind of close, it doesn't look like it's going to be a good source of victory points. Overall, I'd say that as secondaries go, these just don't look all that great. I feel like the secondary section is going to be a bit of a weaker one for the Leagues of Votann, and they might need to focus on killing units or just scoring the book ones. So with secondaries out the way, that brings us to the end of our review of the new Leagues of Votann Codex, and all the augmented dwarven goodness within. It seems that the initial reaction to the book is that it looks very strong indeed. I must admit, the Judgement Token mechanic does just seem like it's going to farm out crazy damage against most armies. They're not all that hard to put on enemy units, and when you got 3 of them on a big one, that unit is just going to go down quite quickly. Otherwise, within the Codex, I feel like all the characters are pretty amazing value for what they bring. I think they're going to be out in full force in most competitive lists. Having access to very scary guns like that Land Fortress's railgun is pretty terrifying. Just the idea of this pretty much deleting entire gobs of units, almost no questions asked, is pretty brutal. I think their stratagem section is really strong, lots of easy access damage stratagems, and plenty of handy army-wide ones, like being able to fall back and shoot, heroic intervene, or return fire in the shooting phase. And also the leagues themselves seem like they have some very powerful boosts to each faction. The chapter tactic equivalent seems very strong, as do the better judgment mechanics. For all that, I do feel that they do have some pretty big weaknesses compared with at least some 40k armies. Even with access to a couple of mobility stratagems, in general they really are quite slow. Most of the armies moving 5 inches. If they advance, they're not going to be dealing any damage at all. And a lot of their weapons are really quite short range as well, so it might often be possible to outrange them for a turn, or just leave them floundering in a place where they're just not going to be able to deal any effective damage to things that are meaningful. The core Warlord traits seem a little bit on the meh side, though I guess a few of the ones out of the upgraded characters do seem good, and despite the faction having void armor, which is very nice, the actual datasheets of the units just aren't really super tough without it, maybe the main exception being the Land Fortress. Perhaps if you're trying to counter Leagues of Votann, fast-moving things that hide well seem like they'd be quite good, and also anything that can deal out quite a lot of mortal wounds seems like it's going to kill a lot of faction units pretty easy. Against almost anything that you put a mortal wound out against, it's going to be killing at least 10 points worth of model, and oftentimes a lot more. Despite some downsides, I think just with their raw damage output, they are probably going to be one of the stronger factions in 40k. I'll reserve judgment at the moment as to just whether or not they're going to break the meta and leave us with a whole new world of OP. Compared with most armies, even if they do have massive damage output, I do feel that they just might struggle to deliver it just a bit more than some. In any case though, I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. It certainly looks like they're a strong and interesting faction, and to be honest, I'm sure if they do wind up just completely breaking the game altogether, Games Workshop will tone them down. In any case, I'm looking forward to making a few more Leagues of Votann unit reviews. I'll hopefully try and get a video out for each of the new units in the Codex. There's plenty of fun datasheets and combos to explore. Feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see them. Finally, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well. That is the thing that allows me to spend quite so much time making really long amounts of videos about Leagues of Votann. Great big in-depth reviews like this do take an awful long time to make. If you have been enjoying a lot or getting good value out of the videos, any support on the Patreon page is enormously appreciated. The link's down in the video description below, and channel patrons do get a fair few rewards, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.